If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is Tom Miller, and this happened to me back in 1963. I was working as a park ranger in Sequoia National Park, California. I've always loved the forest, the way it feels alive, the way it smells of pine and earth, and how peaceful it can be when you're surrounded by towering trees. After everything I went through in Vietnam, I thought the forest would be my refuge. But that night changed everything. It was late October, just as the days were getting shorter and colder. I'd spent most of the day patrolling the trails, checking on campsites, and making sure everything was in order. By the time dusk rolled around, I was ready to head back to base camp. The sun was setting behind the sequoias, casting long shadows across the ground. The air had that crisp bite to it, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine needles and damp earth. It was beautiful, quiet and still, just how I liked it. I stopped for a moment to take it all in, leaning against one of those massive trees that seemed like they'd been standing there forever. A distant owl hooted somewhere deep in the forest, its call echoing faintly through the trees. I felt at peace, like I always did out here. But then something changed. It started with a mist. At first, it was just a thin layer curling around the base of the trees, not unusual for this time of year. But within minutes, it thickened into a heavy fog that seemed to cling to everything. It wasn't normal. It felt wrong somehow. The air grew colder, so cold that I could see my breath puffing out in front of me like little clouds. I reached for my radio to check in with base camp, but all I got was static. That wasn't too strange. Sometimes the signal didn't carry well this deep into the forest. Still, something about the crackling noise unsettled me. I tried again, adjusting the dial, but no luck. And then there was silence. Not just quiet, complete silence. No rustling leaves from the breeze, no chirping crickets or distant bird calls. Even the owl had stopped hooting. It was as if someone had hit a mute button on the entire forest. My gut told me something wasn't right. I scanned my surroundings with my flashlight. It was still working fine then, and noticed claw marks on one of the nearby trees. They were deep gouges running down the bark, far too high up for any animal I knew of to reach. Bears? Maybe, but bears don't usually climb sequoias like this. That's when I heard it a whisper. It wasn't loud or clear. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once, soft and eerie, like wind slipping through cracks in an old house. At first, I thought it might just be my imagination playing tricks on me, or maybe some weird effect of the wind moving through the mist. But as I stood there listening, I realized it wasn't random noise. It sounded like words. I couldn't make out what they were saying exactly, just fragments here and there, but they sent a chill down my spine all the same. I tightened my grip on my flashlight and started walking back toward base camp, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping over me. But with every step I took, that whisper seemed to follow me, growing louder, closer. I didn't know it yet, but that whisper would haunt me for years to come. I tried to stay calm as I walked through the forest, but something about that whisper wouldn't leave me alone. It wasn't just the sound of it, it was the way it seemed to come from everywhere at once. No matter which direction I turned, it was there, like the trees themselves were speaking. The mist kept getting thicker, curling around my boots and rising up to my knees. My flashlight beam barely cut through it now, and everything beyond a few feet was just a blur of gray and shadows. I knew these trails like the back of my hand, but with the fog this heavy, even I started feeling unsure of where I was. The silence didn't help either. It wasn't natural, not out here. The forest is never truly quiet, not even at night. There's always something: crickets chirping, leaves rustling, animals moving in the underbrush. But now, nothing. Not a single sound except for my own footsteps crunching on the dirt path, and that whisper. I stopped for a moment to get my bearings, shining my flashlight around. That's when I noticed it. The claw marks again. This time they were on another tree, just off the trail. Deep gouges, long and jagged, like something big had raked its claws down the bark, and they were fresh. The edges of the wood were still raw and splintered. I crouched down to get a closer look when I saw something else. Tracks in the dirt. They weren't human, too big for that. And they didn't look like any animal tracks I'd ever seen either. 4 toes, long and narrow, with deep impressions like whatever made them was heavy. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stood back up and scanned the area again with my flashlight. The mist swirled around me, making it hard to see anything clearly, but for a split second I thought I saw movement, something shifting between the trees up ahead. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the heavy fog. "Is someone there?" No answer. Just the whispering, still faint but constant, like it was waiting for me to do something or go somewhere. I shook my head and tried to focus. Maybe it was just some campers messing around or an animal that wandered too close to the trail. That's what I told myself anyway. But deep down, I knew better. Something about this felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I kept walking, moving faster now, trying to put some distance between me and whatever had left those tracks behind. My flashlight flickered once, just for a second, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. The batteries were fresh, there was no reason for it to act up like that. "Come on," I muttered under my breath, giving it a little shake as if that would help. It flickered again, this time longer, and then went out completely. I froze in place, standing there in total darkness, except for the faint glow of the mist around me. My hand instinctively went to my belt where I kept my backup flashlight, but before I could grab it, I heard something, a low growl coming from somewhere in front of me. It wasn't loud, more like a deep rumble, but it was enough to make every hair on my body stand on end. "Who's there?" I called out again, louder this time. No response, just that growl echoing through the trees. I took a step back, my boots crunching loudly on the dirt trail in the otherwise silent forest. My hand finally found my backup flashlight, and I fumbled with it for what felt like forever before clicking it on. The beam cut through the mist just enough for me to see what was ahead, and what I saw stopped me cold. A deer carcass lay sprawled across the trail about 20 feet away from me. Its body was twisted at an unnatural angle, its neck bent so far back that its head almost touched its spine. There was no blood, not on the ground or anywhere else, but its eyes were wide open, staring blankly into nothing. My stomach turned as I took another step back, trying not to look at it for too long. That's when I noticed something else. The claw marks again. They were everywhere now, on the trees around me, on the ground near the deer's body, even on some rocks further down the trail. Whatever had done this wasn't far away. I could feel it. The whispering grew louder then, not loud enough to be clear, but enough to make me feel like it was closing in on me from all sides. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and turned around quickly, ready to head back toward base camp as fast as I could. But when I looked behind me, the trail was gone. The path that had been so clear just minutes ago was now swallowed by mist and shadows. Trees that should have been familiar landmarks were nowhere to be seen. It was like the forest had shifted somehow, rearranging itself while I wasn't looking. For the first time in years since Vietnam, I felt real fear creeping into my chest. And then, the whisper spoke my name. Hearing my name whispered in the middle of that silent, misty forest made my blood run cold. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough that there was no mistaking it. Tom. It came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, like the trees were calling me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the fog, but all I saw were shadows shifting between the trees. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking slightly despite myself. No answer, just the whisper again. "Tom." It stretched out this time, slow and deliberate, like whoever or whatever was saying it wanted me to know they were watching me. I tried to steady my breathing and think rationally. Maybe it was a trick of the wind or echoes bouncing off the trees. Maybe someone from base camp was messing with me, though I couldn't figure out how they'd know where I was or why they'd bother. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. I turned back toward where the trail should have been and started walking, trying to stay calm. But with every step I took, the mist seemed to thicken even more, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. My flashlight barely lit up a few feet ahead of me now, and everything else was just swirling gray. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Tom, help." It wasn't just my name anymore. It sounded like someone was calling for help, their voice soft and broken, like they were hurt or scared. For a brief moment, I thought maybe it was someone, a lost camper or hiker who needed me to find them. But deep down I knew better. The voice didn't sound right. It sounded hollow somehow, like it wasn't coming from a real person, but something trying to sound like one. Still, I couldn't ignore it completely. If there was even a chance that someone was out there and needed help, I had to check it out. That's what being a ranger meant. I followed the sound of the voice deeper into the forest, moving slowly and carefully. The ground beneath my boots felt softer now, almost spongy, like it had rained recently even though I knew it hadn't. The air smelled different too, less like pine and earth and more like something metallic, almost like blood. The whisper kept calling out to me as I walked. "Tom, over here." It sounded farther away now, pulling me deeper into the misty woods. The trees around me seemed taller than before, closer together too, and their branches twisted in strange ways that made them look almost human in the dim light of my flashlight. I stopped when I saw something up ahead. A faint glow through the fog. It wasn't bright. Just a soft reddish light flickering between the trees like an old lantern swinging in the wind. "Hello?" I called out again, hoping for some kind of response. The glow didn't move or change. It just stayed there, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. I took a few cautious steps closer, keeping my flashlight trained on it. That's when I noticed something strange. The claw marks were back again on every tree around me now, and they were getting deeper and more jagged with each one I passed. The whisper came again, louder this time and more urgent. "Tom, hurry. I hesitated for a moment, torn between going back to base camp and finding out what was causing all of this. But before I could decide, my flashlight flickered again and then went out completely. I froze in place as darkness swallowed me whole. The glow ahead of me was still there, but now it felt farther away somehow, like it was retreating into the mist. That's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps behind me. They weren't loud, just soft crunches on the forest floor, but they were close enough that I could feel my chest tighten with fear. I turned around quickly, fumbling for my backup batteries in my pocket as I scanned the darkness with nothing but my ears to guide me. The footsteps stopped as soon as I moved, like whoever was following me didn't want to be seen. "Who's there?" I said again, trying to keep my voice steady even though my hands were shaking now. No answer, just silence again, and then another whisper. "Tom." This time it wasn't far away, it was right behind me. I spun around so fast that I nearly dropped my flashlight entirely, but there was nothing there. Just mist and shadows shifting between the trees. That's when I realized something else. The forest had gone completely still again. No wind rustling through the leaves, no animals moving in the underbrush, nothing except for that whisper echoing in my ears. And then, a low growl rumbled through the darkness, not far away this time but close enough that I could feel it vibrating in my chest. It wasn't loud or aggressive, it sounded more like a warning than anything else, but it sent chills down my spine all the same. Whatever was out there wasn't human, and it wasn't friendly either. I didn't know what to do. My instincts told me to head back to base camp, but the forest wasn't letting me. The trail was gone, the mist was too thick, and the whispers kept pulling me deeper into the woods. Something about this felt like a trap, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to keep going. I took a deep breath and started walking again, my flashlight still dead in my hand. The growl I'd heard earlier hadn't come back, but I could feel something watching me, something big, something close. After what felt like hours of wandering through the fog, I stumbled onto a campsite. At first, I felt relieved. Maybe whoever was calling for help was here. But as soon as I stepped closer, I realized something was very wrong. The campsite was a mess. Supplies were scattered everywhere, tents ripped open, sleeping bags tossed aside like garbage. A cooler lay on its side with its lid cracked open, its contents spilled across the ground. It looked like someone or something had torn through it in a frenzy. I crouched down to examine the scene more closely, my heart pounding in my chest. There was blood on the ground, not a lot, but enough to tell me someone had been hurt here. It trailed off into the trees, leading deeper into the forest. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice shaky now, despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Is anyone here?" No answer, just the whisper again. "Tim, help." It sounded closer now, almost like it was coming from just beyond the edge of the campsite. I stood up and followed the blood trail cautiously, gripping my flashlight tightly, even though it wasn't working anymore. The mist seemed even heavier here, and every step I took felt harder than the last, like the forest itself didn't want me to move forward. The trail led me to another clearing where I found something that made my stomach turn, a deer carcass lying in the middle of the path. It looked worse than the one I'd seen earlier. Its body was twisted and broken in ways that didn't make sense, its legs bent backward, its ribs poking through its skin like jagged branches, and just like before, there was no blood, not on the ground or anywhere. I swallowed hard and forced myself to look away from it, scanning the area with what little light I had from the glow of the mist around me. That's when I saw them. The claw marks again. They were everywhere now, on trees, rocks, even on some of the dirt near where I stood. They were deeper than before too, long gouges that looked like they'd been made by something strong enough to tear through solid wood without effort. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized how fresh they were, the edges of the bark still raw and splintered. Whatever had done this wasn't far away. I could feel it. The whisper came again, louder this time and more urgent. "Tom, hurry." It sounded desperate now, almost pleading, but there was something off about it still. It didn't sound human, it sounded hollow and strange, like it wasn't coming from a real person, but something trying to sound like one. I tightened my grip on my flashlight and turned back toward where I thought base camp should have been. But when I looked behind me, the trail was gone again. The path that had been so clear just minutes ago was now swallowed by mist and shadows. Trees that should have been familiar landmarks were nowhere to be seen. It was like the forest had shifted somehow, rearranging itself while I wasn't looking. For the first time in years since Vietnam, I felt real fear creeping into my chest. And then, the whisper spoke my name again, but this time it wasn't far away. It was right behind me. I froze in place, my breath caught in my throat. The whisper had come from right behind me, so close I could have sworn I felt the air shift. My body stiffened, every instinct screaming at me not to turn around. But I had to. Slowly I turned, my hands trembling as I raised the dead flashlight like it could somehow protect me. At first, all I saw was the mist swirling in the dim light of the moon. The trees stood tall and silent, their massive trunks disappearing into the fog above. And then, something moved. It was quick, just a shadow slipping between the trees. But it was enough to send my heart racing. Whatever it wasn't small. It was tall, taller than any person I'd ever seen, and it moved with an unnatural grace, like it wasn't bound by the same rules of movement we are. "Who's there?" I called out again, my voice shaking now, despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Show yourself." The forest stayed silent for a moment, and then the whisper came again, this time from somewhere deeper in the woods. "Tom, over here." It sounded farther away now, like it was trying to lead me somewhere else. But I wasn't about to follow it, not after what I'd just seen. I took a step back, keeping my eyes on the spot where the shadow had disappeared. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Was it an animal? A person? Something else entirely? None of it made sense, but one thing was clear. I wasn't alone out here anymore. The mist seemed to thicken even more as I backed away, swallowing up everything around me until all I could see were faint outlines of trees and shadows shifting in the fog. My breathing grew heavier as I tried to stay calm, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. And then, I saw them. Eyes. Two glowing red eyes staring at me from between the trees. They weren't bright, more like faint embers, but they stood out against the darkness like nothing else. They didn't blink or move. They just stared at me, unblinking and cold. I don't know how long I stood there frozen, staring back at them. It felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. They felt like they were stuck in place, rooted to the ground like one of those ancient sequoias. The eyes shifted slightly then, just enough for me to see that whatever they belonged to wasn't standing still anymore. It was tall, easily over 8 feet, and its limbs were long and thin, almost too long for its body. Its skin, or whatever covered it, was dark and seemed to ripple like shadows moving over water. But what struck me most was its face, or lack of one. There were no features, no mouth, no nose, just those glowing red eyes set into a blank surface that seemed to absorb all light around it. I finally managed to take a shaky step back, my heart pounding so hard in my chest that it felt like it might burst. The creature didn't move any faster. It just stood there watching me with those unblinking eyes, as if waiting for something. And then, it spoke. Not with words, not out loud, but inside my head. Tom. The voice was cold and hollow, echoing in my mind like a distant scream carried on the wind. Help me. I shook my head violently, trying to block out the sound, but it didn't stop. It just grew louder and more insistent until it felt like my skull might split open. Tom, don't run. That was enough for me. I turned and bolted into the mist without looking back, running as fast as my legs would carry me. The forest blurred around me as branches scraped against my arms and face, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away from whatever that thing was. The whispers followed me as I ran, not just one voice now, but many, all overlapping and echoing through the trees like a twisted chorus. Don't run. Come back. You can't leave. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Not until I saw something up ahead that made me skid to a halt. It was another tree, but this one was different from all the others around it. Carved into its bark were more claw marks, but these weren't random scratches like before. They formed a pattern, a symbol that looked almost human but not quite right. It reminded me of something ancient and primal, something older than these woods themselves. The whispers stopped suddenly as I stared at the symbol, replaced by an eerie silence that felt even worse than before. And then, a growl came from behind me, low and guttural, and much closer than before. The growl sent a jolt of fear through me, freezing me in place for just a second. It was deep and rumbling, like it came from something far too big to be close. My instincts kicked in, and I spun around, shining my flashlight wildly into the mist. Nothing. But I could feel it. Whatever was out there, it was close, too close. I didn't wait to find out what it was. My legs finally listened to me, and I took off running again, weaving through the trees as fast as I could. The ground felt uneven beneath my boots, roots and rocks catching at my feet, but I didn't dare slow down. The growl came again, louder this time, closer. I glanced over my shoulder as I ran, and for a split second I saw it, that shadowy figure with its glowing red eyes moving between the trees. It wasn't running like I was. It didn't need to. It glided through the mist like it was part of it, its long limbs stretching out unnaturally as it moved. Tom. The whisper came again, but now it wasn't distant or hollow. It was right in my ear, like someone was running beside me. I stumbled at the sound, nearly losing my footing on the uneven ground. My flashlight slipped from my hand and clattered to the dirt behind me, but I didn't stop to grab it. The backup light wasn't working anyway, and I wasn't about to waste time fumbling for it in the dark. The mist seemed alive now, swirling and shifting around me, as if trying to block my path. Every time I thought I saw an opening between the trees, it would close up again, forcing me to change direction. It was like the forest itself didn't want me to leave. The whispers grew louder as I ran, dozens of voices overlapping now, all calling my name or begging for help or laughing softly in ways that made my skin crawl. Tom. Over here. Don't run. You can't escape. I tried to block them out, focusing only on putting one foot in front of the other. My lungs burned with every breath, and my legs felt like they might give out at any moment. But I couldn't stop. not with whatever that thing was chasing me. The growl came again, this time so loud and close that I could feel it vibrating in my chest. I risked another glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. It was there, closer than ever, its tall frame towering over the trees around it. Those glowing red eyes locked onto me as its long limbs stretched out toward me like they were trying to grab me. And then, it smiled. It didn't have a mouth before, or at least not one I could see, but now there was something there. A jagged line splitting its face open into a grin full of sharp teeth that seemed too big for its head. "Tom," it said again, not a whisper this time, but a low guttural voice that echoed through the forest like thunder. I turned back around and pushed myself harder than ever before, ignoring the pain in my legs and chest as I sprinted through the trees. The mist seemed to thin slightly up ahead, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, I could outrun it. But then the ground gave way beneath me. One second I was running full speed, the next I was tumbling down a steep slope, dirt and rocks scraping against my arms and legs as I slid uncontrollably toward whatever lay at the bottom. When I finally came to a stop, everything hurt. My arms, my legs, even my ribs from where they'd slammed into something hard during the fall. But there wasn't time to think about any of that. The whispers were still there, fainter now but still present, and so was that growl. I forced myself to sit up despite the pain, and looked around frantically for anything I could use as a weapon or a way out. That's when I saw it. An old campsite tucked into a small clearing at the base of the slope. It looked abandoned, just a single tent, half collapsed under years of dirt and leaves. But there was something else there too. An old fire pit surrounded by stones, and next to it, a pile of wood. I didn't have time to think. The growl was getting closer, and I knew that thing was coming for me. My body ached from the fall, but I forced myself to my feet, stumbling toward the old fire pit. The pile of wood wasn't much, just some dry branches and logs someone had left behind years ago, but it might be enough. I didn't know if fire would stop whatever was chasing me, but it was the only idea I had. I grabbed as many pieces of wood as I could carry and threw them into the pit, my hands shaking so badly that I nearly dropped them. My fingers fumbled with the matches I kept in my pocket. Thank God they were still dry, and after what felt like an eternity, I managed to strike one. The flame flickered weakly in the cold air, but it was enough to catch the edges of the wood. I crouched down and blew on it, trying to coax it into something bigger. The whispers were louder now, circling around me like a storm, and every time I looked over my shoulder, I swore I saw those glowing red eyes watching me from the shadows. "Come on," I muttered under my breath, my voice shaky as I fed more wood into the fire. "Come on." Finally the flames roared to life, casting flickering light across the clearing. For the first time in what felt like hours, I could see clearly again. The mist seemed to retreat slightly in the presence of the fire, pulling back like it didn't want to get too close. But then, it stepped into the light. The creature moved slowly at first, its long limbs stretching out as it emerged from the shadows. Its skin, or whatever covered it, seemed to ripple in the firelight, shifting between solid and shadow like it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Those glowing red eyes locked onto me again, and that jagged grin spread across its face. It didn't rush me. It didn't need to. It knew I was trapped here. "Stum," it said again, its voice low and guttural, echoing through the clearing like thunder. I grabbed a burning branch from the fire pit and held it out in front of me like a torch, my hands trembling so badly that the flames danced wildly in the air. "Stay back," I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. The creature tilted its head slightly at my words, almost like it was curious. Then it took another step forward. I swung the torch wildly in its direction, and for a moment it stopped. Its body seemed to flicker like a shadow caught in sunlight, but then it kept coming. The whispers grew louder again, dozens of voices overlapping now, all calling my name or begging for help or laughing softly in ways that made my skin crawl. "Tom, you can't leave. Don't fight." I stumbled backward toward the edge of the clearing, keeping the torch between me and that thing as best as I could. My mind raced as I tried to think of something, anything, that might stop it. And then, an idea hit me. The ravine. I remembered seeing one earlier when I'd been patrolling this area, It wasn't far from here if I could just get there. Maybe, just maybe, I could lure this thing into falling over the edge. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all I had. I swung the torch again as I backed away toward where I thought the ravine might be. The creature followed me slowly at first, but then picked up speed, its movements becoming faster and more erratic as if sensing what I was trying to do. The whispers grew louder still, almost deafening now, and every time they spoke my name or called out for help, they made my head throb painfully. "Tom, don't run. Stay with us." I ignored them as best as I could and kept moving until finally, there it was. The edge of the ravine loomed ahead of me, a steep drop into darkness that seemed endless in the faint light of my torch. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned back toward the creature one last time. It was closer now, close enough that I could see every detail of its twisted form, those glowing red eyes staring into mine, that jagged grin full of sharp teeth, those long limbs reaching out toward me like they were trying to pull me into its shadowy embrace. I waited until it was almost on top of me before making my move. With every ounce of strength left in my battered body, I swung the burning branch directly at its face, and for just a moment, it recoiled violently as if struck by something solid. That was all the time I needed. I turned and ran straight for the edge of the ravine, and just before reaching it, I dove out of the way at the last second. The creature didn't stop. It couldn't, and with one final growl that echoed through the forest, it tumbled over the edge into darkness below. I lay there on the cold ground, gasping for air, my chest rising and falling like I'd just run a marathon. My hands were scraped raw, and my knees ached from the dive I'd made to avoid going over the edge myself. The torch had rolled out of my grip, its flame flickering weakly a few feet away. For a moment, everything was quiet. The whispers were gone, the growls had stopped, and even the mist seemed to have pulled back. All I could hear was the sound of my own breathing and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. I forced myself to sit up, wincing as pain shot through my ribs. My flashlight was long gone, but the glow from the fire pit back in the clearing gave me just enough light to see the edge of the ravine. I crawled toward it cautiously, every nerve in my body screaming at me not to get too close. When I reached the edge, I peered down into the darkness below. At first, I couldn't see anything. It was just blackness stretching endlessly into nothing. But then, something moved. It wasn't much, just a faint ripple in the shadows, but it was enough to make me freeze. The creature hadn't disappeared completely. It was still down there somewhere, waiting, and then it spoke. "Tom." The voice was faint now, barely more than a whisper carried on the wind, but it was enough to send chills down my spine. "I'll return." I scrambled back from the edge, my heart pounding in my chest. The mist began creeping back toward me again, curling around my legs like it was trying to pull me closer to the ravine. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran back toward the clearing as fast as my battered body would let me. When I reached the fire pit, I grabbed another burning branch and held it out in front of me like a shield. The mist seemed to retreat slightly in its presence, but I could still feel that thing's presence lingering in the air around me. I didn't know what else to do except keep moving. My sense of direction was shot. Every trail looked unfamiliar now, but somehow, I managed to find my way back toward base camp. It took hours, or at least it felt like hours, but eventually, I saw the faint glow of lights through the trees. Relief washed over me as I stumbled into camp, barely able to stand anymore. One of the other rangers, Mike, came running over when he saw me. "Tom, what happened? Are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern as he helped me sit down near one of the cabins. I wanted to tell him everything, the whispers, the claw marks, that thing with its glowing red eyes, but when I opened my mouth to speak, nothing came out. My throat felt dry and tight, and all I could manage was a weak shake of my head. Mike didn't press me for answers after that. He just brought me some water and let me sit there until I felt steady enough to stand again. The next day, I went back into the forest with Mike and a few other rangers to check out what had happened. We found the campsite, the torn tents and scattered supplies, but there was no sign of claw marks or blood trails anymore. Even the deer carcass was gone. When we reached the ravine where I'd seen that thing fall, there was nothing there either. No tracks, no signs of movement. Just silence and shadows stretching endlessly into darkness below. The others chalked it up to exhaustion or stress, said maybe I'd imagined it all after getting lost in the mist. But I knew better. I knew what I'd seen and heard and felt out there in those woods. And every time I close my eyes at night, I still hear that whisper calling my name. My name is Elena Yazzie, and this happened to me in the summer of 1991. I've always been someone who believed in facts, history, and things you could touch and see. I grew up hearing the old stories from my grandmother, tales about spirits, skinwalkers, and curses. But I always thought they were just that, stories. That was until that night at Mesa Verde National Park when everything changed. I worked as a park ranger back then, patrolling the ancient cliff dwellings left behind by the ancestral pueblones. It was my job to protect these sacred places from vandals and curious tourists who didn't understand their importance. That evening started like any other. The sun was setting, painting the sandstone cliffs in deep oranges and reds. A warm breeze carried the familiar scent of sagebrush and juniper, and the cawing of crows echoed through the canyon. Peaceful, right? But there was something off about that night. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The shadows seemed longer than usual, stretching unnaturally across the ground as if they had a life of their own. Dust devils swirled in the distance, but they didn't move like they normally did. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw one twist into the shape of a person before it disappeared into nothingness. I shook it off, probably just my eyes playing tricks on me after a long day. As part of my routine, I made my way to one of the restricted caves near the far end of the park. This cave wasn't open to visitors because it was still being studied by archaeologists. My mentor, Dr. Robert Hayes, had spent years researching it before he vanished without a trace earlier that year. His disappearance haunted me more than I liked to admit. When I reached the cave entrance, everything seemed normal at first. The metal gate we'd installed was locked tight, just as I'd left it that morning. I checked it twice anyway, force of habit, and gave a small nod to myself before turning away. But then, I felt it. The air around me grew colder, much colder than it should have been for a summer evening in Colorado. A shiver ran down my spine as I reached for my flashlight and turned it on. The beam cut through the growing darkness but didn't seem to reach as far as it should have. It was like the shadows were swallowing the light. I took a deep breath and told myself to calm down. "It's just your imagination," I muttered under my breath, though my voice sounded shaky even to me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me. As I turned to leave, a faint sound caught my attention. Whispers. At first, I thought it might be the wind moving through the canyon. But no, it was too deliberate for that. The whispers were soft but distinct, like voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I froze in place, gripping my flashlight tightly as my heart pounded in my chest. "Hello," I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. No answer, just more whispers that grew louder with each passing second. I swung my flashlight toward the petroglyphs carved into the rock walls near the cave entrance. These ancient symbols had always fascinated me. They told stories of people who lived here centuries ago. But tonight they looked different. When I glanced at them directly, they were just as they'd always been, faded carvings etched into stone by hands long gone. But when I looked out of the corner of my eye, they moved. I blinked hard and looked again, but nothing changed this time. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or maybe not. The whispers stopped suddenly, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. That's when I noticed something else. Small stones and pebbles near my feet were rolling uphill against gravity, as if being pulled by an invisible force toward the cave entrance. My stomach dropped as dread settled over me like a heavy weight. Something wasn't right here. Something ancient and powerful that didn't belong in this world anymore. I stepped back instinctively, clutching at the turquoise pendant around my neck, a gift from my grandmother meant to protect me from harm. It felt warm against my skin now, almost like it was alive. "Time to go," I whispered to myself, and turned away from the cave entrance, trying not to run even though every instinct screamed at me to get out of there as fast as possible. But as I walked away, one last thing caught my eye, a shadow on the ground that didn't match anything around it. A tall figure standing perfectly still where no one should have been. I didn't stop to investigate further this time. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't something I wanted to face alone in the dark. And yet, deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. My name is Elena Yazzie. I'm 38 years old, and I've spent most of my life walking the line between two worlds. The modern one we live in, and the ancient one my ancestors left behind. I grew up on the Navajo Nation, surrounded by stories about spirits, curses, and creatures that could take on any shape they wanted. My grandmother used to tell me those stories while she braided my hair, her voice soft but serious. She believed in them completely. I didn't. Even as a kid, I was the one asking questions. Why couldn't anyone prove these things existed? Why did the stories always change depending on who told them? I wanted facts, not legends. That's why I became an archaeologist. I thought if I could study the past, really dig into it, I'd find answers that made sense. But life doesn't always go the way you plan. After years of working in labs and field sites, I realized I wasn't cut out for the politics of academia, the funding battles, the endless paperwork, the pressure to publish instead of protect what mattered most. So I traded my lab coat for a ranger's uniform and took a job at Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado. It felt like coming home in a way. The land here reminded me of where I grew up, wide open spaces, towering cliffs, and a sky so big it made you feel small. But it was more than that. These cliff dwellings were built by the ancestral Puebloans hundreds of years ago, long before my people came to this area. They were sacred places, full of history and mystery, and it was my job to keep them safe. I loved my work even if it wasn't always easy. Tourists could be careless, touching fragile artifacts, carving their names into ancient walls, but most of them meant well. It was the vandals who kept me up at night, the ones who broke into restricted areas looking for treasure or cheap thrills. They didn't understand what they were messing with. Neither did I, not really. That summer had been harder than most. My mentor, Dr. Robert Hayes, had disappeared while exploring one of the restricted caves in the park. He wasn't just my boss, he was my friend, someone who shared my passion for preserving history and protecting sacred spaces. He'd been researching strange carvings in one of the caves when he vanished without a trace. The search teams never found him. Not his body, not his gear, nothing. It was like he'd been swallowed by the earth itself. I didn't talk about it much. Not with my coworkers, not with anyone, but his disappearance weighed on me every day. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at that cave entrance during my patrols, wondering what had happened to him and why no one could explain it. That night was no different. As I walked away from the cave after checking the locks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The shadows seemed to stretch farther than they should have, twisting across the ground like they were alive. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me from all sides. I reached for my turquoise pendant without thinking, a habit I'd picked up as a kid whenever I felt nervous or scared. My grandmother had given it to me when I left for college, telling me it would protect me from harm. She said it carried the prayers of our ancestors and connected me to the land no matter how far away I went. I didn't believe her back then, not really. But tonight it felt warm against my skin, almost like it was trying to tell me something. I took a deep breath and kept walking toward my truck, parked at the edge of the canyon. The whispers had stopped, or maybe I'd imagined them, but the uneasy feeling hadn't gone away. As much as I wanted to leave this place behind for the night, part of me couldn't let go of what I'd seen. The melted locks on the gate, the shifting petroglyphs on the cave walls, the shadow that didn't belong to anything around it. It wasn't just strange, it was impossible. And yet, deep down, it felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't sleep much that night. The strange things I'd seen and heard near the cave kept replaying in my mind. The whispers, the moving shadows, the stones rolling uphill. I told myself it was just exhaustion, maybe even stress from everything that had happened with Dr. Hayes. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The next morning, I decided to head back to the restricted area. I needed to check it out again in daylight when everything would feel less ominous. At least, that's what I told myself. The sun was climbing high by the time I reached the site. The air was warm and the park was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. It felt normal, peaceful, even. But as I stepped closer to the cave entrance, that uneasy feeling crept back in. The first thing I noticed was the gate. The locks were still melted, just like they'd been the night before, but now, the gate itself was slightly ajar. My stomach tightened as I pushed it open and stepped inside. The cave was cool and dim, sunlight filtering through cracks in the rock above. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. The ground was dusty and undisturbed, and the tools left behind by researchers were still neatly stacked near the entrance. But then I saw it, fresh excavation marks in the dirt near one of the walls. Someone had been digging here recently, and they hadn't bothered to cover their tracks. I crouched down to get a closer look. The marks weren't made with modern tools, that much was clear. They were rough and uneven, like someone had been clawing at the ground with their bare hands or something primitive. I stood up quickly, brushing off my pants as a chill ran down my spine. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice echoing off the stone walls. No answer. I shined my flashlight around the cave, its beam cutting through the shadows. That's when I saw them. Cave paintings on a section of wall that had been blank just days ago. The images were crude but unmistakable. Figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes standing in a circle around a central figure wearing what looked like a feathered headdress. The central figure's arms were raised as if commanding them, or controlling them. I felt a lump form in my throat as I stared at the paintings. They weren't there before, I was sure of it. I'd inspected this cave dozens of times during my patrols, and that wall had always been bare. My radio crackled suddenly, making me jump. "Elena? You there?" It was Mike, one of my coworkers on patrol duty. I grabbed the radio from my belt and pressed the button to respond. "Yeah, Mike, what's up?" There was a pause before his voice came through again, quieter this time. "You hearing this?" "Hearing what?" I asked, frowning. Another pause. Then static filled the radio for a few seconds before I heard it. A faint chanting in the background, like a group of voices speaking in unison. It wasn't English or Spanish or any language I recognized. It sounded ancient. "I've been picking this up for about 10 minutes now," Mike said, his voice tense. Thought maybe it was interference from one of those tourist groups. "It's not," I said quickly, glancing back at the strange paintings on the wall. "Stay where you are for now. I'll check it out." "Elena," Mike started to say something else, but his voice cut off abruptly as more static filled my radio. "Mike," I called out, but there was no response. My hands were shaking as I clipped the radio back onto my belt and turned toward the cave entrance. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't normal. As I stepped outside into the sunlight again, something caught my eye. A small pile of pottery shards scattered near the base of a cliff wall nearby. They looked ancient, probably ancestral Puebloan, but what caught my attention wasn't their age or design. It was how they began to move. At first, it was subtle, a tiny twitch here and there, as if they were being nudged by an invisible hand. Then they started sliding across the ground toward each other until they formed a complete bowl right before my eyes. I stared at it in disbelief as my heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. But there it was, an ancient piece of pottery reassembling itself like it had never been broken. Before I could process what I'd just seen, a gust of wind whipped through the canyon, carrying with it a faint melody, ghostly flute music that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Paikan. That clutched my pendant tightly as fear clawed its way up my throat. Whatever this was, it wasn't human, and it wasn't friendly. I stood there frozen, staring at the bowl that had just pieced itself back together. My mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation. Wind, vibrations, maybe even a prank, but nothing made sense. I'd seen pottery before, hundreds of times during my work as an archaeologist, but I'd never seen it move. The ghostly flute music still hung in the air, faint and haunting. It wasn't coming from any direction I could pinpoint. It was just asterisk, their asterisk, like it was part of the canyon itself. I wanted to run back to my truck, drive far away and forget any of this had happened. But something deep inside me told me I couldn't leave. Not yet. I took a shaky breath and stepped closer to the cave entrance again. The air felt different now. Heavier, colder. It pressed against my skin like a warning, but I ignored it. I had to know what was going on. The pendant around my neck grew warm again, pulsing softly against my chest. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was strange, almost like it was alive. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind, "This will protect you when the time comes." I hadn't believed her then, but now I wasn't so sure. I stepped inside the cave for the second time that day. The sunlight barely reached past the entrance, and the shadows seemed darker than they should have been. My flashlight flickered as I turned it on, and for a moment, I thought it might go out completely. But the beam steadied, cutting through the gloom. The strange paintings were still there on the wall, those hollow-eyed figures surrounding the one in the feathered headdress. But now there was something new, fresh handprints smeared in red dust below them. They hadn't been there earlier. My pulse quickened as I scanned the cave for any sign of movement. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice trembling slightly. "If someone's here, you need to leave. This area is restricted." Silence. I took another step forward, my boots crunching softly on the dirt floor. That's when I noticed something else. A faint glow coming from deeper inside the cave. It wasn't bright, just a soft amber light that flickered like a candle flame. I hesitated for a moment before moving toward it. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and get out of there, but curiosity, or maybe something stronger, kept me going. As I rounded a corner, the source of the light came into view, a small alcove carved into the rock wall. Inside it sat an object unlike anything I'd ever seen before. A vessel made of dark clay covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change when I looked at them too long. The glow was coming from inside the vessel, spilling out through tiny cracks in its surface. The air around it felt charged, like static electricity before a lightning storm. I reached out slowly, almost without thinking, but stopped when a sudden gust of wind rushed past me from deeper within the cave. It shouldn't have been possible. There were no openings or tunnels that could have caused it. The flute music grew louder then, echoing off the stone walls until it felt like it was coming from all directions at once. My pendant burned hot against my skin now, not painfully so, but enough to make me pull my hand back from the vessel. That's when I heard it. Footsteps behind me. They were slow and deliberate, too heavy to belong to an animal, but too uneven to sound entirely human. My heart leapt into my throat as I spun around, shining my flashlight into the darkness. Nothing. The footsteps stopped as soon as I turned around, leaving only silence behind them. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady even though fear was clawing at me from the inside out. No answer. Just more silence, and that awful feeling of being watched. I backed away slowly toward the alcove where the glowing vessel sat. My flashlight flickered again as shadows danced along the walls in ways they shouldn't have been able to move. And then, I saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness near the entrance of the cave, a tall silhouette with impossibly long limbs and a head adorned with what looked like feathers or antlers. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. It didn't make a sound as it stepped closer, but its presence filled the space with an overwhelming sense of dread. My chest tightened as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. The figure stopped just outside my flashlight's beam, its hollow eyes glinting faintly in what little light remained. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe, as it raised one skeletal hand and pointed directly at me. And then, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was still in the cave, but something was different. The air felt heavier, thicker, like I was underwater. My flashlight had gone out, and the only light came from the faint glow of the vessel behind me. The silence was absolute. No wind, no flute music, no sound at all. It was as if the world outside had disappeared. I sat up slowly, my head pounding and my heart racing. The figure I had seen earlier, the one with the feathered headdress and hollow eyes, was gone, or at least, I thought it was. Then I saw the footprints. They were faint but unmistakable, pressed into the dusty floor of the cave. They weren't human, too long, too narrow, and they didn't follow a normal pattern. It was like whoever, or whatever had made them, wasn't walking but gliding across the ground. I scrambled to my feet, clutching my pendant tightly. It was still warm against my chest, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. "Okay, Elena," I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm. "You need to get out of here." But as I turned toward the entrance of the cave, I froze. The figure was back. It stood just a few feet away now, its tall frame hunched slightly as if it were too big for the space around it. Its body was wrapped in tattered feathers and animal skins that seemed to shift and ripple, even though there was no breeze. Its face, or what should have been its face, was hidden in shadow, but its eyes were hollow pits that glowed faintly with an unnatural light. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It felt like the air itself was holding me in place. The figure tilted its head slightly, studying me like a predator sizing up its prey. Then it stepped closer, not walking but gliding across the ground without a sound. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. It didn't answer, not with words anyway. Instead, it raised one skeletal hand and pointed toward the glowing vessel behind me. I turned to look at it instinctively, and that's when I felt it, a sudden rush of cold air that seemed to pass right through me. My vision blurred for a moment as whispers filled my ears again, louder this time and more insistent. I spun back around to face the figure, but it was gone. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving only silence behind them. My flashlight flickered back to life suddenly, its beam cutting through the darkness and landing on something that made my blood run cold. The vessel, the one that had been glowing just moments ago, was now cracked open down the middle. A dark substance seeped out from inside it like thick smoke, curling upward and spreading through the cave. And then it started to take shape. The smoke coiled and twisted until it formed a tall figure almost identical to the one I had seen earlier. But this time, it wasn't just a shadow, it was solid. Its skin was dry and cracked like old leather, and its headdress of feathers and antlers seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light. It raised its arms slowly, and as it did, the ground beneath me began to tremble. Loose stones rolled across the floor of the cave toward the creature as if being pulled by some invisible force. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet as I tried to put some distance between us. "Stay back," I shouted, though my voice sounded small and weak in the vastness of the cave. The creature didn't stop. It moved toward me with slow, deliberate steps that made no sound at all. As it came closer, I could feel something pressing against my mind, like fingers reaching into my thoughts and pulling them apart. Images flashed before my eyes, visions of people I didn't recognize performing rituals in this very cave centuries ago. They chanted in a language I couldn't understand as they painted symbols on the walls with what looked like blood, and then there was fire. The visions ended as suddenly as they had begun, leaving me gasping for air and clutching at my pendant like it was a lifeline. The creature stopped just a few feet away from me now, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then it raised one hand again, not to point this time but to reach for me. I don't know what came over me then, maybe instinct or desperation, but I yanked my pendant off its chain and held it out in front of me like a shield. To my surprise and relief, the creature recoiled instantly as if burned by an invisible flame. It let out a low growl that sounded more like wind rushing through a canyon than any living thing I'd ever heard before. The pendant glowed brightly in my hand now, brighter than it ever had before. The warmth spread through my body like a wave of energy, giving me strength where there had been none moments ago. "You're not taking me," I said firmly, though my voice still shook slightly. The creature tilted its head again as if considering my words or maybe testing my resolve, before letting out another low growl and retreating into the shadows once more. I didn't wait around to see what would happen next. Clutching the pendant tightly in one hand and my flashlight in the other, I turned and bolted for the entrance of the cave as fast as my legs would carry me. The whispers followed me all the way out, but they weren't coming from inside anymore. They were coming from everywhere. I burst out of the cave into the bright sunlight, gasping for air like I'd been underwater for hours. My legs felt shaky, but I didn't stop running. I didn't dare look back. Whatever that thing was, whatever had just come out of that vessel, it wasn't human, and it wasn't done with me. The whispers didn't stop when I left the cave. They followed me, growing louder and more chaotic with every step I took. They weren't just in my ears anymore. They were inside my head, swirling around like a storm I couldn't escape. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Anger, rage. I reached the edge of the canyon and grabbed onto the rope ladder that led down to the lower trails. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped my flashlight, but I managed to clip it to my belt before starting my descent. The ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed down, my pendant still glowing faintly against my chest. Every few seconds, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see that creature coming after me. But there was nothing, just shadows stretching across the canyon walls. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd escaped. Maybe whatever it was couldn't leave the cave. But then the ground shook. It started as a low rumble beneath my feet, like distant thunder rolling through the earth. Then it grew stronger, sending loose rocks tumbling down the cliffs around me. Dust filled the air as cracks spread across the sandstone walls, and I realized with a sinking feeling that this wasn't natural. It was coming for me. I climbed faster, my hands gripping the rope so tightly that they burned. The whispers grew louder now, almost deafening, and I could feel something cold brushing against my back, like fingers reaching out to grab me. I made it to the bottom of the ladder just as another tremor shook the ground. Without thinking, I dove behind a boulder for cover as chunks of rock fell from above, crashing onto the trail where I'd been standing seconds ago. My heart was pounding so hard that it felt like it might burst out of my chest. "Think, Elena," I whispered to myself, trying to calm down. "You've got to think." I pulled out my radio and pressed the button to call for help. "Mike, are you there?" My voice cracked as I spoke, but I didn't care. I just needed someone to answer. Static crackled through the speaker for a moment before fading into silence. "Mike?" I shouted again, but there was no response. I shoved the radio back onto my belt and peeked out from behind the boulder. The trail ahead was clear for now, but the whispers were still there, echoing through the canyon like they were coming from everywhere at once. I didn't have time to wait for backup. If I stayed here any longer, whatever was chasing me would catch up, and I didn't want to find out what would happen if it did. I ran. The trail twisted and turned as it wound through the canyon, and every step felt heavier than the last. The air seemed thicker now, making it harder to breathe, and shadows danced along the walls in ways that didn't make sense, moving against the direction of the sunlight. Loose stones rolled uphill as I passed them, defying gravity like they were being pulled by some invisible force toward me. My pendant burned hot against my skin again, pulsing faster now, like it was trying to warn me of something. The whispers grew louder still until they weren't whispers anymore. They were screams, and then they stopped. The silence hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment I thought maybe it was over, that whatever had been chasing me had given up or disappeared. But then I saw it. The creature stood at the far end of the trail ahead of me, blocking my path with its tall frame and hollow eyes. It didn't move. It just stood there watching me like it was daring me to come closer. I skidded to a stop and backed away slowly, clutching my pendant tightly in one hand and my flashlight in the other. "Stay back," I said again, though my voice sounded weak even to me. The creature tilted its head slightly before raising one hand, and suddenly everything around me changed. The trail disappeared in an instant, replaced by swirling shadows that seemed to stretch infinitely in every direction. The canyon walls melted away into darkness until there was nothing left but me and that thing standing in front of me. It stepped closer now, not gliding this time, but walking slowly toward me with deliberate movements that made no sound at all. Its hollow eyes locked onto mine as it raised both arms high above its head, and then brought them down sharply toward the ground. The earth beneath me shook violently as cracks spread outward from where its hands had struck. Rocks tumbled into the abyss below as pieces of the trail crumbled away, and suddenly there was nowhere left for me to run. I was trapped. The trail behind me had crumbled into nothing, and the creature stood ahead, blocking my only way out. The shadows around us twisted and pulsed, almost alive, and the air felt thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. My heart pounded in my chest as I gripped my pendant tightly, its warmth the only thing keeping me grounded. The creature didn't move for a moment, just stared at me with those hollow, glowing eyes. Then it raised one skeletal hand and pointed to something behind me. I turned slowly, my stomach twisting with dread. There, carved into the canyon wall, was an ancient kiva, a circular ceremonial chamber used by the ancestral Pueblones. I'd seen it before during my patrols, but it had always been sealed off, its entrance blocked by heavy stones. Now, though, the stones were gone, and the opening yawned like a dark mouth waiting to swallow me whole. The whispers started again, soft at first but growing louder with every passing second. They seemed to be coming from the kiva now, calling to me, pulling me toward it. "No," I whispered under my breath. "No way." But the ground shook again, more violently this time, sending loose rocks tumbling down the canyon walls. The creature stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate, forcing me to back away toward the kiva. I didn't have a choice. With one last glance at the creature, I turned and ran into the kiva's dark entrance. The whispers grew deafening as I descended the narrow stone steps into the chamber below. My flashlight flickered weakly in my hand, casting shaky beams of light across the walls. The kiva was larger than I'd expected, its circular walls covered in faded petroglyphs and symbols I didn't recognize. In the center of the room was a fire pit surrounded by stones arranged in a strange pattern. The air was cold, colder than it should have been this far underground, and carried a faint metallic smell that made my skin crawl. I turned back toward the entrance just in time to see the creature step inside. It didn't need to duck or squeeze through. It moved like smoke, its body shifting and bending unnaturally as it entered the chamber. My pendant burned hot against my chest again as I stumbled backward toward the fire pit. "Stay away," I shouted, holding up my flashlight like it would somehow protect me. The creature didn't stop. It raised both arms again, and suddenly the petroglyphs on the walls began to glow faintly. The symbols shifted and twisted before my eyes, forming new shapes that seemed to pulse with energy. Then I felt it, a presence pressing against my mind like icy fingers digging into my thoughts. Images flashed before my eyes again, rituals performed in this very kiva centuries ago, people chanting and dancing around the fire pit, a figure wearing a feathered headdress standing at the center of it all. The skinwalker. That's what this thing was. The creature from my grandmother's stories that could shift between human and animal forms. A shaman who had traded their humanity for power long ago and had been cursed to walk between worlds ever since. And now, it wanted me. I dropped to my knees beside the fire pit as pain shot through my head like lightning. The whispers were inside me now, not just around me, but asterisk in asterisk me, filling every corner of my mind with their ancient language. "Fight," a voice whispered softly, different from the others. It wasn't angry or chaotic like them, it was calm and steady. "You must fight." I didn't know where it came from, maybe my pendant or maybe something deeper, but I clung to it like a lifeline. My hands fumbled with the stones around the fire pit as I tried to make sense of their arrangement. Then I saw it, a pattern hidden within them that matched one of the glowing symbols on the wall. It wasn't just decoration, it was a clue left by those who had come before me. My hands moved on their own as I rearranged the stones into their proper places. The whispers grew louder and more frantic, as if they knew what I was doing, and they didn't like it. The skinwalker let out a low growl that vibrated through the chamber as it lunged toward me. But before it could reach me, my pendant flared brightly with an intense heat that forced it back. The final stone clicked into place just as the creature recovered from its retreat. The ground beneath us trembled violently as ancient mechanisms hidden within the kiva came to life. A circle of light erupted from the fire pit, surrounding both me and the skinwalker in its glow. The creature thrashed wildly against its invisible boundaries but couldn't escape. "Bind it," that calm voice urged again. "Use your strength." I didn't know how, but somehow I did. Clutching my pendant tightly in one hand, I reached out with the other toward one of the glowing symbols on the wall, the one that matched both my pendant and the pattern on the floor. Words spilled from my lips without thinking, words in a language I didn't know but felt deep in my bones. The light around us grew brighter until it filled every corner of the chamber, and then silence. When I opened my eyes again, the skinwalker was gone, or rather, bound. The vessel from earlier sat in front of me now, whole once more but glowing faintly with an eerie light. It pulsed softly like a heartbeat before fading into stillness. I collapsed onto the cold stone floor, exhausted but alive. For now, I don't know how long I sat there on the cold stone floor of the Kiva, staring at the vessel. My body ached, my mind felt like it had been torn apart and stitched back together, and my heart was still racing. But most of all, I felt different, like something had shifted inside me. The whispers were gone now. The air was still and quiet, almost peaceful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the silence wasn't entirely natural. It was as though the Kiva itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling beneath me. The vessel sat in the center of the fire pit, dark and still, but I could feel its presence, heavy and ancient, like it was watching me even though it didn't have eyes. My pendant had cooled down again, its warmth fading into a faint hum against my chest. I knew one thing for certain, whatever I had done, it wasn't over. Not really. The skinwalker was bound, trapped inside that vessel just like the rituals on the walls had shown. But it wasn't destroyed, and it wouldn't stay locked away forever. I reached out hesitantly and picked up the vessel. It was lighter than I expected, but holding it sent a shiver through my entire body. The carvings on its surface seemed to shift under my finger like they were alive. I wanted to drop it and run as far away as I could, but I couldn't leave it here, not where someone else might find it. I climbed back up the narrow stone steps to the surface, clutching the vessel tightly in both hands. The sunlight hit me like a wave as I emerged from the Kiva, and for a moment I just stood there, letting the warmth wash over me. The canyon was quiet again, no whispers, no flute music, no shifting shadows. It was almost like nothing had happened at all. Almost. I made my way back to my truck slowly, every step feeling heavier than the last. My radio crackled to life as I reached the vehicle, startling me so badly that I nearly dropped the vessel. "Elena? Are you there?" Mike's voice came through loud and clear this time. I fumbled for the radio and pressed the button to respond. Yeah, I'm here. Where have you been? We've been trying to reach you for hours," he said, his voice full of concern. Hours. It felt like only minutes had passed since I'd entered the cave, but when I looked at my watch, he was right. Somehow, an entire afternoon had slipped away without me realizing it. "I'll explain later," I said quickly. "Just meet me at base camp." There was a pause before Mike replied. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." I didn't tell him about the skinwalker or what had happened in the Kiva. Not yet. How could I? It sounded insane, even to me, and I'd lived through it. As I drove back to base camp with the vessel sitting on the passenger seat beside me, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened or what it meant for me now. Something had changed inside me during that ritual in the Kiva. Something I couldn't explain or fully understand yet. The world didn't look quite the same anymore. It felt fuller somehow, like there were layers to it that I hadn't noticed before. And then there were the spirits. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, a figure standing near one of the cliff dwellings, or a shadow that didn't belong to anything nearby. But when I turned to look directly at them, they were still there. They didn't feel threatening, not like the skinwalker had, but their presence was undeniable. They watched me silently, as if waiting for something, or maybe testing me. By the time I reached base camp and handed off my report to Mike, leaving out most of what had really happened, I knew one thing for sure: my life would never be normal again. The skinwalker might have been bound for now, but Mesa Verde wasn't just a park anymore, not to me. It was alive in ways most people couldn't see or understand. And somehow, so was I. As for what comes next, well, let's just say this isn't a story with an ending. It's only the beginning. My name is Sarah Connor, and this happened to me in the winter of 1978. I've worked as a park ranger in Glacier National Park, Montana for 5 years now. I've seen my share of harsh winters, but nothing could have prepared me for what I faced that night. It was the kind of cold that didn't just bite, it clawed at you, seeped into your bones, and made you feel like you'd never be warm again. I was stationed alone in one of the fire towers deep in the park, miles away from anyone else. The view from up there was breathtaking. Vast, snow-covered peaks stretched out as far as I could see. The sun was setting, casting a reddish glow over the snow that made everything look eerie, almost unreal. The wind howled through the narrow mountain passes, rattling the tower like it wanted to tear it apart. I stood by the window, sipping on lukewarm coffee and rubbing my hands together for warmth. My breath froze in the air as I exhaled, forming little clouds that disappeared almost instantly. The temperature had been dropping all day, but now it felt like something unnatural was happening. The cold wasn't just outside, it was creeping into the tower itself. My equipment started freezing up. Even my radio crackled and hissed like it was struggling to work. I glanced down at the snow-covered forest below and froze. There were tracks, long stretched-out footprints that didn't look like they belonged to any animal I knew of. They zigzagged across the snow in strange patterns, like whatever made them wasn't walking straight. I grabbed my binoculars and tried to get a closer look, but the light was fading fast, and all I could make out were shadows moving between the trees. The radio suddenly picked up a strange transmission, garbled words in a language I couldn't recognize. It sounded like someone or something was trying to communicate, but it wasn't human. The static grew louder until it cut off completely, leaving an eerie silence behind. Then came the rumble, a distant avalanche shaking the tower slightly under my feet. But it wasn't just snow falling, it felt like something heavy was moving through the mountains themselves. The sound echoed through the valley, growing louder before fading away again. I didn't want to admit it to myself at first, but I felt it deep down. Something wasn't right in the park tonight. It wasn't just the cold or the tracks or the strange sounds, it was a feeling in my gut that told me I wasn't alone anymore. I tightened my jacket around me and checked my gear one last time before stepping out onto the tower's balcony. Icicles hung from the railing like crystal daggers, catching what little light remained from the setting sun. The wind whipped against my face as I scanned the horizon one more time, hoping for some sign of normalcy. But all I saw were shadows growing longer as darkness swallowed the mountains whole. That's when I heard it, a distant howl carried on the wind. It wasn't a wolf or a coyote, it was something deeper, darker, something that made every hair on my body stand on end. And that was just the beginning. I've always loved the mountains. Ever since I was a little girl, they felt like home to me. My brother Mark used to say that the cold made us stronger, that every snowstorm was just another challenge to conquer. He was the one who taught me how to climb, how to read the weather, how to survive when things got tough. But Mark isn't here anymore. He died 5 years ago in a climbing accident. We were scaling a peak together when a sudden storm rolled in. The wind was so strong it felt like it could rip us off the side of the mountain. I tried to hold on, tried to help him, but there was nothing I could do. He fell, and I couldn't save him. I don't talk about it much, not to my coworkers, not to anyone. But every time I'm out here in the park, I feel him with me. His voice in my head telling me to keep going, to push through the fear. That's why I took this job as a search and rescue specialist. It's my way of honoring him, of making sure no one else has to go through what we did. Still, it's not easy. Sometimes I take risks I shouldn't, climbing too high, going out in storms that would send most people running for cover. It's like I'm trying to prove something to myself, maybe even to Mark. But deep down, I know it's not just about him. It's about me trying to make peace with what happened. Tonight felt different from the start. There was a heaviness in the air, like the park itself was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the shadows, waiting for me to make a move. I reached for the compass around my neck, the one Mark gave me before his last climb. It's old and scratched up now, but it's my lucky charm. He told me it would always point me in the right direction, even when everything else felt wrong. I held it tightly in my hand as I stared out at the darkening forest below. The tracks were still there, stretching across the snow like scars on the landscape. The wind picked up again, rattling the tower and sending chills down my spine. I thought about calling for backup. There were other rangers stationed miles away, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride or stubbornness, or just that gut feeling telling me this wasn't something anyone else could help with. Whatever it was, I stayed put and waited for night to fall completely, and then I saw it. A flare shooting up into the sky from somewhere deep in the forest. Someone needed help. The flare hung in the sky like a tiny, desperate scream. Its bright red glow flickered against the blackness of the forest, cutting through the shadows for just a moment before fading away. Someone was out there, and they were in trouble. I didn't hesitate. This was my job to help people who got lost or hurt in the park. But as I grabbed my gear and prepared to leave the tower, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this wasn't right. The door to the tower wouldn't budge at first. It was frozen shut, ice sealing it like glue. I had to kick it hard several times before it finally broke free with a loud crack. The cold hit me like a wall as I stepped outside, sharp and unforgiving. My breath froze in the air almost instantly, forming tiny crystals that sparkled in the moonlight. I checked my radio again, hoping to hear something, maybe a voice calling for help, but all I got was static. Then, buried beneath the crackling noise, I thought I heard something else. It was faint at first, but as I listened closer, it became clearer. Screams. They weren't normal screams. They sounded twisted, like they were being dragged through metal or echoed underwater. And mixed in with them were low growls that didn't sound human at all. I shook my head and tried to focus. Maybe it was just interference or my imagination playing tricks on me. Either way, I couldn't ignore the flare. Someone needed me. I strapped on my pack and checked my climbing gear one last time before heading out into the night. The snow crunched under my boots as I made my way down from the tower and into the forest below. Every step felt heavier than usual, like the cold was trying to pull me down into the ground. The trees loomed around me, their bare branches covered in ice that glinted like knives in the moonlight. The wind whipped through them, making them creak and groan like they were alive. As I moved deeper into the forest, strange things started happening. My climbing rope snapped when I tested it. It had become brittle from the cold, even though it was designed to withstand extreme temperatures. My flashlight flickered and died after just a few minutes, leaving me with nothing but moonlight to guide me. And then I found it, the elk carcass. It was lying in a clearing, half buried in snow and frozen solid. But what caught my attention wasn't just that it was dead. It was how it looked. The body had been torn apart, chunks of flesh missing as if something had taken huge bites out of it. The edges of the wounds were frozen over completely, like they'd been flash frozen in seconds. I crouched down to get a closer look but stopped when I noticed something else, footprints leading away from the carcass. They were massive, far bigger than any animal tracks I'd ever seen, and they didn't look right. The shape was wrong, almost human but stretched out unnaturally long, and they weren't sinking into the snow like normal tracks. They barely disturbed the surface at all. The wind picked up again, carrying with it a sound that made my stomach drop, footsteps crunching in the snow behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight toward the noise, but there was nothing there. The trees creaked loudly as if something huge was moving through them, snapping branches and shaking trunks as it passed by. I tightened my grip on my pack and started moving faster toward where I thought the flare had come from. My heart pounded in my chest as every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't leave whoever had sent that signal behind. The cold grew worse with every step, burning my skin even through layers of clothing. My fingers started to go numb despite my gloves, and frostbite began creeping up faster than it should have been possible. And then came the sound, the howl. It wasn't an animal howl. It was deeper than that, louder than anything I'd ever heard before. It echoed through the forest like thunder rolling across mountains. Whatever made that noise wasn't far away, and it wasn't friendly. The howl echoed through the forest, long and low like something ancient waking up from a deep sleep. It wasn't just loud, it was the kind of sound you could feel in your chest vibrating through your ribs and making your stomach twist. I froze where I stood, gripping my pack straps tightly to keep my hands from shaking. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, maybe a wolf or a bear, but deep down I knew better. I'd spent years in these mountains. I knew the sounds of every animal that lived here. This wasn't one of them. The tracks in the snow seemed to stretch on forever, leading deeper into the forest. They were strange, too long, too thin, and they didn't sink into the snow like normal footprints. It was like whatever made them was barely touching the ground. I followed them cautiously, keeping my eyes on the trees around me. The wind was picking up again, rattling branches and sending flurries of snow swirling through the air. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement, shadows darting between the trees. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. The cold was getting worse, biting through my jacket and gloves like they weren't even there. My fingers were numb now, and my face stung with frostbite despite being covered by a scarf. It didn't make sense. Temperatures this low shouldn't even be possible here. Then I saw it. A half-eaten elk carcass lying in the snow. It wasn't just dead, it was destroyed. The body had been torn apart, chunks of flesh missing as if something had taken huge bites out of it. The edges of the wounds were frozen solid, like they'd been flash frozen in seconds. I crouched down to get a closer look, but stopped when I noticed something else. Claw marks on the ground next to the carcass. They were massive, far bigger than any bear or cougar, and they dug deep into the frozen earth. My stomach churned as I stared at them. Whatever made those marks wasn't just big, it was strong enough to tear through solid ice and dirt like it was nothing. I stood up quickly and scanned the area around me, my heart pounding harder with every second. The wind carried faint sounds, branches snapping, snow crunching, but I couldn't see anything moving. That's when I noticed something strange, ice forming on the trees around me. It wasn't normal frost or snow. It was spiraling patterns of ice that seemed to grow right in front of my eyes, twisting and curling like vines climbing up the trunks. The patterns were too perfect to be natural. They looked deliberate, almost like writing. I stepped back slowly, my breath coming out in short bursts that froze instantly in the air. My gut told me to turn around and run, but my legs wouldn't move. It felt like something was holding me there, keeping me frozen in place. Then came the footsteps. They were heavy and slow at first, crunching through the snow with deliberate force. But they weren't coming toward me. They were circling around me, moving just out of sight behind the trees. I spun around, shining my flashlight toward the noise, but all I saw were shadows shifting between the branches. The footsteps got louder, faster now, closing in from every direction. My pulse raced as panic set in. I couldn't see whatever was making those sounds, but I knew it was close. Suddenly, one of the trees near me cracked loudly and fell to the ground with a deafening crash. Snow exploded into the air as branches snapped like toothpicks under some invisible weight. I stumbled backward, barely catching myself before falling into the snow. My flashlight flickered again before going out completely, leaving me in near total darkness. The wind grew stronger now, howling through the forest like it was alive. It carried faint sounds, whispers mixed with growls that sent chills down my spine. I tightened my grip on my compass, the only thing that felt solid and real right now, and forced myself to keep moving forward toward where I thought the flare had come from. Every step felt heavier than the last, as exhaustion set in. My legs burned from trudging through deep snow while frostbite crawled up my fingers and toes faster than it should have been possible. And then came another sound. The same howl as before, but closer this time. It was so loud it drowned out everything else. The wind, my own breathing, and left an eerie silence behind when it finally stopped. I didn't know what was waiting for me out there in the darkness, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was wasn't human. The howl wasn't just close, it felt like it was right behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ear, and my breathing came in quick, shallow gasps. I turned around slowly, shining my flashlight into the darkness, but all I saw were trees and snow. The footsteps started again, crunching through the snow in slow, deliberate steps. They weren't circling me anymore. They were coming straight toward me. I gripped my compass tightly in one hand and my flare gun in the other. My fingers were so numb I could barely feel them, but I held on anyway. The flare gun wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all I had. Then I saw it, At first it looked like a pile of snow shifting in the distance, but as it moved closer, I realized it wasn't snow at all. It was fur. White, shaggy fur that blended perfectly with the snowdrifts around it. The creature rose up from behind a fallen tree, towering over everything around it. It had to be at least 12 feet tall, maybe more. Its arms were long and thin, ending in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. Its antlers twisted upward like branches covered in frost, catching the moonlight and glinting like ice. But its face, that was the worst part. It wasn't human, but it wasn't fully animal either. Its eyes glowed faintly, like embers buried deep in a fire pit. They stared straight at me, unblinking and cold. Its mouth stretched unnaturally wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth that looked like shards of ice. I froze where I stood, unable to move or even breathe. The creature let out a low growl that rumbled through the air like thunder. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't listen. It stepped closer, moving with an unnatural speed that didn't match its size. The snow didn't crunch beneath its feet anymore. It didn't leave any tracks at all. It floated above the ground like a ghost. I raised the flare gun and fired without thinking. The flare shot out toward the creature in a burst of red light, but before it could even reach it, the flame froze mid-air and shattered into tiny pieces of ice. I stumbled backward in shock as the creature let out another howl, this one louder and deeper than before. It sounded angry now, like I'd just made things worse. The wind picked up again, swirling around me in a blizzard so intense I could barely see anything. Snow whipped against my face and stung my skin as the temperature dropped even lower. The creature disappeared into the storm for a moment before reappearing closer, too close. It reached out with one clawed hand and swiped at me. I barely managed to duck in time as its claws sliced through the air where my head had been just seconds before. I scrambled backward, slipping on the ice and falling hard onto my side. Pain shot through my shoulder as I hit the ground, but I forced myself to get back up. The compass around my neck swung wildly as I moved, and for a split second something strange happened. The creature hesitated. It stopped moving entirely and stared at the compass like it recognized it or hated it. I grabbed the compass with trembling hands and held it out toward the creature. Its glowing eyes narrowed as it let out another growl, but this time it didn't come closer. I didn't know why or how, but somehow this old piece of metal was keeping it at bay. The wind started to die down slightly as the creature backed away slowly into the shadows of the forest. For a moment, I thought it might leave, but then I heard something that made my blood run cold. It mimicked me. Its voice wasn't perfect. It sounded distorted and hollow, but it repeated words I'd shouted earlier when I thought someone needed help. Help. Please. Help. It was trying to lure me closer. I gritted my teeth and tightened my grip on the compass. "You're not getting me," I whispered under my breath as I turned and started running toward what looked like an opening in the trees ahead. The creature roared behind me, a sound so loud it felt like the earth itself was shaking, but I didn't look back. I ran faster than I ever had before, ignoring the pain in my shoulder and the burning cold tearing through my skin. My only goal was to get away, to survive long enough to figure out what this thing was and how to stop it for good. But deep down I knew this wasn't over yet. I ran. The cold air burned my lungs, and the snow beneath my boots felt like it was trying to pull me down with every step. My legs ached, my shoulder throbbed from the fall earlier, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. That thing was behind me, and I knew if I slowed down even for a second, it would catch me. The forest around me was a blur of shadows and snow. The moonlight barely broke through the thick branches overhead, and every sound seemed amplified. The crunch of my boots, the wind howling through the trees, the distant crack of ice. But worst of all were the footsteps behind me, heavy, deliberate, and far too close. I glanced back once, just for a second. It was there, moving through the trees like a ghost. Its massive body didn't seem to touch the ground at all. It floated just above the snow, its antlers scraping against the low-hanging branches. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me that had nothing to do with the weather. I turned back around and pushed myself harder. My mind raced as fast as my feet. Where could I go? What could I do? The flare gun was useless. My climbing gear had snapped earlier in the cold. All I had was the compass around my neck, and somehow it had made that thing hesitate before. But why? The wind picked up again, swirling snow into my face and blinding me for a moment. I stumbled, but managed to catch myself before falling. The snowstorm was getting worse by the second, as if the creature itself was controlling it. I reached a steep incline and started climbing as fast as I could, using my hands to pull myself up when my boots slipped on the icy surface. The wind howled louder now, carrying with it faint whispers that sent chills down my spine. They weren't words exactly, just sounds that felt wrong, like they didn't belong in this world. When I reached the top of the incline, I paused for a moment to catch my breath and looked around. Below me was a frozen lake, its surface shimmering under the pale moonlight. It stretched out wide and open, too open, but it was my only option. The footsteps were louder now, closer. I didn't have time to think. I slid down the other side of the hill toward the lake, barely managing to stay on my feet as gravity pulled me forward. When I hit the edge of the ice, I hesitated for just a second before stepping onto it. The ice groaned under my weight, but held steady, for now. I moved quickly, but carefully across the lake, trying not to think about how thin the ice might be in some spots, or what would happen if it cracked beneath me. Halfway across, I heard it again, the howl. It echoed across the lake like thunder, so loud it made me flinch. I turned around slowly, and saw it standing at the edge of the forest, its massive body silhouetted against the trees. For a moment, it just stood there watching me. Then it stepped onto the ice. The creature moved faster than anything that size should have been able to, gliding across the frozen surface like it wasn't even touching it. Its glowing eyes never left mine as it closed the distance between us in seconds. Panic surged through me as I ran toward the far side of the lake, my boots slipping on patches of smooth ice. The creature let out another howl, a sound so deep and guttural it felt like it shook the ground beneath me. And then came a loud asterisk crack. Asterisk, I stopped dead in my tracks and looked down. A web of fractures spread out from where I stood, spidering across the ice in every direction. The creature stopped too, tilting its head slightly as if listening to something only it could hear. Another asterisk crack. Asterisk echoed through the air, louder this time. I looked back at the creature and realized something. It didn't care about falling through the ice. It wasn't afraid of drowning or freezing or anything else that might kill a normal animal or person. But I was. The cracks were spreading fast now, racing toward where I stood like veins running through glass. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to think of what to do. And then I remembered, the compass. I grabbed it from around my neck and held it out in front of me like a shield. The creature stopped moving again, its glowing eyes narrowing as if it recognized what I was holding. For a moment, just a moment, it hesitated. That's when I made my move. I ran toward one of the larger cracks in the ice and jumped over it just as another loud asterisk crack asterisk split through the air behind me. The creature followed, but its weight was too much for this part of the lake to handle. The ice gave way beneath it with an ear-splitting roar as chunks of frozen water collapsed into the dark depths below. I didn't stop running until I reached solid ground on the other side of the lake. When I finally turned around, all I saw was darkness where the creature had fallen through, and then movement. It wasn't gone, not yet. Its massive claws gripped at chunks of floating ice as it tried to pull itself back up onto solid ground. I clutched my compass tightly in one hand and whispered under my breath, "Not today," and then I ran again. I didn't want to stop running. Every part of me screamed to keep going, to get as far away from that thing as possible, but I knew deep down that I couldn't outrun it forever. It was faster than me, stronger than me, and it wasn't going to stop until it had me. I turned back toward the lake, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. The creature was still clawing at the ice, pulling itself out of the freezing water like it didn't even feel the cold. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine again, and I felt that same wave of dread wash over me, the kind that made my legs feel like they might give out at any second. I tightened my grip on the compass around my neck. It was the only thing that had made it hesitate before, and I had to believe it could help me again. The ice beneath my boots groaned loudly as I stepped back onto the frozen lake. The cracks were everywhere now, spreading out in jagged lines that threatened to collapse the surface entirely. But I didn't have a choice. I had to face this thing here and now. The creature rose to its full height again, towering over me like a nightmare come to life. Its fur was soaked with icy water, wool glinting in the moonlight like shards of glass. Steam rose from its body as if the cold couldn't touch it, and its antlers caught the light in a way that made them look almost alive. It let out another howl, deep and guttural, and started moving toward me again. Its claws scraped against the ice with every step, sending chills down my spine. I held up the compass in front of me like a shield, hoping it would stop the creature again. For a moment, it did. It hesitated, its glowing eyes narrowing as if it hated the sight of it, but this time, it didn't back away. Instead, it lunged. I barely managed to dodge as its claws swiped through the air where I'd been standing just seconds before. The force of its attack sent chunks of ice flying into the air, some of them hitting me hard enough to knock me off balance. I scrambled back to my feet and held up the compass again, shouting at the creature even though I wasn't sure it could understand me. "Stay back," I yelled, my voice shaking with fear and adrenaline. It growled low in its throat, a sound so deep I could feel it vibrating through the ice beneath me, and lunged again. This time, I didn't dodge fast enough. Its claws grazed my arm, slicing through my jacket and leaving a burning pain behind. The cold hit me instantly where its claws had touched, like frostbite spreading faster than should have been possible. I stumbled backward, clutching my arm as blood started to seep through the fabric of my jacket. The creature moved closer again, its glowing eyes fixed on me like a predator stalking its prey. The ice beneath us groaned louder now, cracking and shifting as the weight of both of us pushed it closer to collapse. And then I saw my chance. One of the larger cracks in the ice had spread right beneath where the creature was standing. If I could lure it onto that spot and break the ice completely, maybe, just maybe, I could get rid of it for good. I gritted my teeth and forced myself to stand up straight despite the pain in my arm. "Come on," I muttered under my breath, holding up the compass again as I backed toward the crack. The creature followed, moving slowly but deliberately toward me with every step. When I reached the edge of the crack, I stopped and held my ground. The compass swung wildly in my hand as I stared down at the creature's glowing eyes. It lunged again, but this time, I was ready. I jumped sideways at the last second, letting its massive body crash down onto the weakened ice. The surface shattered instantly beneath its weight, sending both of us plunging into freezing water below. The cold hit me like a sledgehammer, sharp and unforgiving, and for a moment all I could do was gasp for air as icy water closed over my head. I kicked hard against the water, fighting to get back to the surface even as my muscles screamed in protest from the cold. When I finally broke through into open air again, I saw chunks of ice floating around me and no sign of the creature anywhere. For a moment, I thought maybe it was gone, that maybe I'd finally escaped. But then came another sound, a roar echoing up from beneath the water. It wasn't dead. Not yet. I grabbed onto one of the larger chunks of floating ice and pulled myself up onto it just as one of its massive claws broke through nearby. It was still trying to get out, and if it did, I knew there wouldn't be any escaping this time. My hands were numb now, almost useless, but somehow I managed to pull off my compass and hold it tightly in one hand. When its head broke through next, those glowing eyes staring straight at me, I didn't hesitate. I lunged forward and drove the compass straight into its chest with all the strength I had left. The creature let out a deafening roar, a sound so loud it felt like it might split open the sky, and thrashed violently against the water before sinking back down into darkness below. I collapsed onto the chunk of ice beneath me, gasping for air as exhaustion finally took over. My arm burned where its claws had sliced through earlier. Frostbite crawled up every inch of exposed skin, but somehow I was still alive. The lake was silent now, except for faint cracks echoing across its surface as broken pieces drifted apart slowly under moonlight above. And then I heard something else, another howl far off in distance beyond trees surrounding lake's edge ahead. It wasn't over. Not yet, but for now, I'd survived long enough to tell Stormy another day ahead. My body felt like it was shutting down. Every breath I took burned in my chest, and my arms and legs were so numb they barely felt like they were mine anymore. I lay there on the frozen shore of the lake, staring up at the night sky, trying to convince myself that it was over, that I had survived. But deep down, I wasn't sure. The forest around me was eerily silent now. No wind, no howls, no footsteps, just the faint creaking of the ice as it shifted and settled. My mind kept replaying the moment I plunged the compass into that thing's chest, its roar echoing in my ears like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. I forced myself to sit up, biting back a groan as pain shot through my shoulder and arm. My jacket was torn where its claws had raked across me, and blood had frozen into the fabric. The frostbite on my fingers was worse now. My gloves were stiff with ice, and I couldn't feel anything past my knuckles. I looked out over the lake, half expecting to see it crawling back out of the water, but there was nothing, just broken chunks of ice floating on the surface, reflecting the pale light of the moon. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't really gone, that it was still out there somewhere, watching me. I didn't have time to think about it. If I stayed here any longer, I wasn't going to make it. The cold was eating away at me faster than I'd ever imagined possible. My only chance was to get back to the fire tower, or at least far enough to signal for help. I stumbled to my feet, clutching my compass tightly in one hand. It felt warm against my skin now, almost like it was alive. I didn't understand why or how it had worked against that creature, but I wasn't about to let go of it. The trek back through the forest was a blur. My vision kept swimming in and out of focus, and every step felt heavier than the last. The snow seemed deeper now, pulling at my boots like quicksand. The trees loomed over me, their branches creaking in the cold, as if they were whispering secrets to each other. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps behind me again, soft and distant, but when I turned around, there was nothing there, just shadows shifting between the trees. By the time I reached the base of the fire tower, I could barely stand. My legs gave out as soon as I hit the first step of the ladder, and for a moment, I thought about just staying there, letting sleep take over and hoping someone would find me before it was too late. But then I thought about Mark, about how he'd never given up, even when things seemed impossible. His voice echoed in my head, "But keep going, Sarah. You can do this." I gritted my teeth and forced myself up one step at a time until I finally reached the top of the tower. The door creaked open under my weight as I stumbled inside and collapsed onto the floor. The radio crackled faintly in the corner, static mixed with garbled voices that didn't make sense. My fingers fumbled with the controls as I tried to send out a distress call. "This is Ranger Sarah, Connor," I said hoarsely into the mic. "I need assistance. Injured. Coordinates." My voice trailed off as exhaustion finally overtook me. When I woke up again, it was daylight. Warm sunlight streamed through the windows of the fire tower, melting some of the frost that had built up overnight. For a moment, I thought maybe it had all been a nightmare, that none of it had been real, but then I saw my torn jacket lying on the floor beside me, stained with blood and ice. And then came the sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air outside. 2 Bear Air Rescue had found me. They bundled me into a stretcher and loaded me onto their helicopter without asking too many questions, just enough to make sure I was still conscious and breathing. As we lifted off into the sky, I looked down at Glacier National Park below us, the endless expanse of snow-covered peaks and shadowy forests stretching out in every direction. It looked peaceful from up here, beautiful even, but I knew better now. The doctor said it was a miracle that I survived. Severe frostbite on both hands and feet meant months of recovery ahead and maybe permanent damage, but at least I was alive. When they asked what happened out there in the park that night, well, let's just say I didn't tell them everything. Some things are better left unsaid. But every now and then, when I'm alone late at night, I think about those glowing eyes staring back at me from across that frozen lake and wonder if they're still out there somewhere, waiting for their next victim. Because one thing's for sure, Glacier National Park is more than just a place of beauty. It's a place where nature reminds you who's really in charge. And sometimes, nature isn't kind.